This is something that has grown more and more obvious in recent months. Why is Toto Wolff so obsessed with Max Verstappen? Because it's grown all the more concerning and all the more inane. It really needs to stop, Toto. It ain't gonna happen. So ever since the news broke about Lewis Hamilton leaving for pastures new with Ferrari and taking copious amounts of sponsors with him, most recently the likes of HP,
I'll be honest with you. I first read that article when I was half asleep, and I thought that they had sponsored with the sauce company. Can you imagine that? Pasta with a bit of brown sauce. Lovely.
Yeah, okay, it's a sponsor change. What's the big deal? It happens all the time. Well, it is pretty big actually, because it's another sign that Ferrari is preparing to embrace its brand new star driver with open arms, as well as eschewing a long-term partner in Philip Morris, who, as we all know, had a very storied partnership with them. So whilst Ferrari has been obsessed with its brand new moneymaker, Toto Wolff has been slowly unravelling whilst his car has not shown immediate signs of improvement, which is quite standard when you've had your third concept change of car in as many years. You're not really going to be hitting the ground running unless it's absolutely blooming stonkingly good, which is really incredibly rare. Because when you look at the rest of the grid, even the ones down at the bottom end of the pack, they're in either the second or third season of using that particular concept. They know a thing or two about it and can extract the most out of it, whereas Mercedes, they've not done that. They have now gone into a brand new concept and have had to start practically all over again, bringing James Allison back into the fold, who thought that he could just spend the rest of his days back at the factory, but is now back in the field. That fortunes won't change until maybe the Canadian Grand Prix, when they start to figure out what they can actually get out of the W15. It's going to take a little while longer. They've got an upgrade coming for Miami, that might yield something, but up until now, they've just had to make do with what they had and just figure out what they have. However, the overall attitude at the team has been incredibly morose, and their team boss has not really helped in regards to bolstering morale and providing a place where hope and progress can thrive. Right now, it seems like every race weekend is an opportunity for Toto Wolff to expand his lexicon and come up with really interesting and weird ways of describing how bad or mediocre the weekend was. This weekend, he's not referring to the W15 as a bad car exactly, he's referring to it as a not an okay car, whatever that means. There are also rumours going around that they're maybe looking at changing the concept again and maybe changing the car designer, getting rid of James Allison entirely. Yes, it's true that Simone Resta has come in from Ferrari and has to partner up with James like he did when James worked for Ferrari. Yes, James did work for Ferrari back in the day. It's becoming clearer that it's more of a, according to the pundit from the BBC, Andrew Benson, a technical misunderstanding. That they've really not got their head around the brand new concept from 2022, the ground effect era, and they've been playing catch up ever since. Getting rid of James and then putting in someone else entirely might mean that Toto could easily have lost his marbles, which is a brand new phrase which I'm really surprised that Toto has not used up to this point. But I kind of get the feeling that this is just yet another signifier that Toto has found himself in a complete downward spiral and that he is desperately trying to claw his way back out of it, but it's quite inevitable, I'm afraid. This tends to happen with all teams who are successful at one particular point. Just accept it, Toto. There are ebbs and flows, peaks and troughs throughout many other Formula One teams. Ferrari goes through them, Red Bull's gone through them, McLaren's gone through, I know that all too well. As well as Williams. They are slowly getting back up there, but it's taking very long. We're talking decades here. It's par for the course, and Mercedes are finding themselves at the beginning or very much near the end of a particular trough. They simply didn't fully prepare or understand the 2022 ground effect regulations, and instead of remaining calm and steadily evolving their W13 concept, which the RB20 does show had potential after all, if understood patiently and eventually, but they simply decided to just eschew all of that and change the concept with the W14 with the side pods included, and then for the W15 they changed it again. And as Adrian Newey pointed out, the guy who designed the RB20, the dominant Red Bulls, in his book How to Build a Car, that if you change your concept all the time, you will never fully understand it. He observed his former team McLaren in the early 2010s, after their really wobbly and shaky start in 2009. Every single year, the McLarens would change remarkably in terms of appearance. They wouldn't really spend enough time to fully get to grasp with what the concept was. Go back to those cars if you don't believe me. They are markedly different every single year. Mercedes are doing the same thing right now, and it goes beyond the car design in my opinion. As you all know, they are going for the big one. Now, I won't bore you with the details about Toto Wolff and Max Verstappen and their history in the sport. You already know that. I've talked about it many times, many publications have mentioned it. But in short, back when Max Verstappen was a rookie, Toto had the opportunity to sign him for Mercedes. They didn't have the right package, it would have taken too long. Red Bull had the opportunity, they gave it to Max, and we all know the rest. Toto is basically kicking himself. And he is now trying to find a way to correct that mistake and bring Max Verstappen into the Mercedes fold, albeit a decade later. Even though there is a slight little problem that Max Verstappen is contracted to Red Bull through 2028. We've still got the remnants of a season and 4 complete seasons left to go on that contract. And even if he were to come to Mercedes, he would come with a hefty salary, and also there's no guarantee that he would even do it, because right now, the W15, it ain't no RB20. It ain't even an SF24, which this season has shown in moments that it has the potential to be competitive against the Red Bulls. Maybe at that point, if they had a Ferrari quality car, Max might consider that there might have been a chance to catch up to Red Bull, that combination. But the fact of the matter is that Mercedes don't have that caliber of car. He might have considered it during the Christian Horner disturbance, where it looked kind of clear that the upper management of Red Bull, which included Helmut Marko, might have been thrown out on their bums and just trying to keep the peace. Maybe if that had changed, that Max would have moved, but it's looking more and more likely by the day that these two men are going to be keeping their positions. It's really fallen into the background of that whole thing, and now I think Christian Horner can look past it and now get back to the day-to-day management of the team, and then realize what Toto's been doing the last few weeks, in fact several weeks, in trying to publicly woo his star driver to come to his team, and that it's looking quite desperate, honestly. But Toto keeps trying anyway. Toto's claiming that the car is not the deciding factor in the driver moving from one team to another, that more factors come into play, though he didn't specify exactly what they were, other than maybe the 2026 regulation changes. Maybe he's thinking along the lines of what happened with Sebastian Vettel in 2014 when Red Bull and he completely fell off hard and Daniel Ricciardo surged upwards. Or maybe, let's just be real, Toto, what you're experiencing right now. If the car that you're driving is not good and it's not looking to get any better anytime soon, then maybe you would consider your options and go somewhere else. Sure, your mechanics might be a really nice bunch of guys, you might get on with them, but you've got a job yourself. You've got to be getting on yourself and trying to be the best driver that you can possibly be. It's a driver-car combination these days. You can't just stick with a team because you want to be loyal. Drivers want fast cars first and foremost, but Toto just keeps on going. Even though he might think that maybe Max won't come over to Mercedes for 2025, he's now trying his luck for 2026 perhaps. A chance to lure the multiple world champion and push out who of your own exactly? Does that imply that maybe in 2026 he might get rid of George Russell? So instead of the Englishman training up the young Italian rookie of Kimi Antonelli, it would be the fabled and bedazzled Dutchman? Oh! George is not going to find that particularly spiffing at all. This team is scrabbling around, trying to find something that would fix all of their problems in an instant, and they're coming up short. This is a team that is supposed to be one of the most successful in the history of modern Formula One for sure. But right now, they just don't have an answer. And they're not looking to really spend time deeply looking at finding an answer. They constantly change their car. They didn't listen in to Mike Elliott's concept, and it's now been proven by Adrian Newey that it could work with further development. Regardless of what you think about the zero-pod concept, Mercedes was still third and second. They were still competitive with Ferrari, albeit a far way off Red Bull, but they were still within the mix. But right now, they're looking lucky to be ahead of Aston Martin. They probably wouldn't be had Lance Stroll, not messed up constantly. But I think what the real reason is, what's fueling Toto's more vocal attitude to bagging Verstappen or signing Antonelli, is to keep the team relevant at a time in its history where it's slipping back towards the clutches of the midfield after having spent over a decade away from it. It's had its worst start since 2011, and all of the sponsors and recognition and glory that it's attained since then, since replacing Michael Schumacher with Lewis Hamilton, which even back then looked like a really big gamble, they're now frittering away, flying away to different teams and different organizations and sports, or maybe going off with Lewis himself. As a result of this, sponsors leaving and less attention coming their way, less merchandise sales perhaps, this is going to naturally decrease the value of the Mercedes F1 team itself. right at a point where it has recently turned over $500 million, the first time any Formula One team has done that. And that might be the only time that Mercedes ever does that. And when you couple in the fact that last year, the team was valued at $3.8 billion, just $100 million short of Ferrari, and that's Ferrari you're talking about here, you can maybe start to piece together the reasons why Toto might be a little bit hot under the collar at the moment. Last year, sure, they turned over a lot of money, but their profits did reduce for the first time. And granted, you could maybe attribute that to the fact they've been hiring more staff and upgrading their Brackley facilities, but the fact is, though, is that the profits did not continue to increase and maybe absorb some of those costs. It could easily go down. Maybe for 2024, if they post it, the value might remain the same or slightly decreased as Lewis Hamilton and their sponsors start to move away to another team. And then Ferrari's value will skyrocket to maybe closer to $5 billion. That'll be the Lewis Hamilton effect. He's already had an influence on their stock price and their market cap. So this will just continue to increase the Scuderia's value even more. So even if Lewis Hamilton doesn't get them a world title or multiple victories, he has actually contributed to Ferrari's good fortune for the years to come. Toto is directly linked to the success of the team itself. You remember back in Las Vegas when Carlos Sainz had that manhole cover thing and it meant that Ferrari would have to absorb all of the costs, and then there was a lot of scrutiny going about the condition of the track, and Toto got really animated about it, defending Formula One to the hilt? Many people might have considered that maybe he's angling for the role of being Formula One's king itself after Stefano Domenicali retires. But more likely, it's because if Formula One is seen in a bad light and more American sponsors don't come over to it, then it might mean that potentially there's less money to be had, that the value of the team and Formula One itself is also connected to his own personal wealth, and the fact that Toto right now is quite asset rich. Based on his share of the team of Mercedes, he is currently a billionaire because he owns a third of it.
And I hate to burst your bubble, but that red splodge on the Silver Arrows car, that ain't going away anytime soon because the company what owns that red splodge, yeah, they own a third of that team as well.
I know this might be oversimplifying matters, but basically, Toto Wolff is a very rich man because of Mercedes' success and prosperity. That prosperity is looking to disappear sometime very soon. So naturally, he's going to want to protect his assets and come up with ideas that might reinvigorate investors, sponsors, bring them back with something really new by bagging the most successful Formula One driver at the moment, or bagging a rookie which is looking incredibly interesting and very salivating to brand new sponsors. It keeps Mercedes relevant, that they're bringing in an 18-year-old to replace a 7-time world champion. That is going to turn a lot of heads. Potentially, Toto Wolff is looking to potentially lose hundreds of millions of dollars at the rate of Mercedes' decline. So thusly, he's got to remain vocal amongst the media and make these sweeping statements, try to tempt Max Verstappen away from Red Bull. He's got to try everything he possibly can. It's looking increasingly desperate what Toto's trying to do with Max. As time has worn on, and now that the jobs of Marco and Horner are looking less precarious, Red Bull's now started to push back against Mercedes, trying to tempt their star driver away, and starting to give Toto Wolff a piece of their minds. Like I just touched upon, Christian Horner has pointed out, mostly accurately, that 2 of their customer teams in McLaren and Aston Martin are either competitive with them or slightly better than them. Again, I think Aston Martin would be ahead of Mercedes at the moment had they had 2 drivers that were on the same caliber or relative caliber to Fernando Alonso. Being the 3rd best Mercedes team and you are Mercedes, that is the thing that you really should be solving instead of trying to court other drivers. Like Christian Horner said, maybe you should be focusing on your car instead of the driver market. And Helmut Marko has a more direct and Austrian take on things, saying that Mercedes' struggles since 2022 have been alarming, and it's irritated him. You can probably take these comments quite seriously for once, considering it's Helmut Marko, in the fact that he and Niki Lauda grew up together in Austria, and they also spent a lot of their time together whilst in the Formula One circus. So therefore, they would know what each other is thinking. So I feel like the comments of Helmut Marko in this particular context would not be all that dissimilar from what Niki Lauda might be thinking if he was still around. I think he would be throwing around a lot of flavoursome and colourful comments Toto's way. Then we've also got to take into account the very public deterioration of the relationship between Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton, which has looked rock solid for a decade at this point. That might be fueling somewhat the obsession of Toto to try and court Max Verstappen, to try and woo a big world champion driver because he's had experience with a world championship driver, and just again trying to remain relevant. Toto has been increasingly despondent and in a way pushing back about what Lewis Hamilton has been saying regarding the car and the setup. George has been following the party line of Toto as well. He's been saying and questioning what Lewis has been doing in the races. So there's a steady isolation of the driver anyway, because the 2025 season is coming up soon, and the driver would understandably be removed from such meetings regarding the W16 because, well, he's not going to be driving for them anymore. Whereas George is going to be fully immersed in it. This will be the first time that this car will be dictated by solely his feedback, and he's going to be making the most of it. He's already making the most of the fact that he is getting better results than Lewis is right now. Admittedly, Mercedes are using Lewis's car more and more for experimentation. Maybe one of those experiments turns out to be absolutely fantastic and Lewis is on the cutting edge and he will be able to reap the rewards before George does. They're trying everything they can and Lewis is right in the middle of it. And you can easily see that the morale is fading away, that the team and Lewis are becoming more and more disconnected. Because when you get to a point where he's trying to find some hope in the W15, and then come China after his results, he then just uses two words, shit happens. That's just a level of misery and pessimism I've never seen from Lewis before. I mean, that sums up his year at Mercedes, doesn't it? He's checked out. He's looking forward to Ferrari. Even though he's being constantly asked about Ferrari, he's probably thinking in the back of his mind that maybe what the SF24 and the 25 will be, I might get to make the most of that. Maybe 2026 might not be all that good, but at least I'll have a good car for 1 year at least. And what really makes me think that Mercedes are almost done with Lewis right now is that they are questioning what he is even saying. That the difference between the results in the sprint and the race itself were down to Lewis solely. That Wolff was saying that Hamilton set the setup direction so wrong that the car didn't turn in corners. And he refuted claims from Lewis that the tyres were to blame and not the setup. This powerhouse couple is breaking apart for all to see. Not in a million years a few years ago, or even last year, would Toto be so vociferously saying that Lewis is wrong. In my honest opinion, it's just beginning to show me that Toto really does not know how to manage the current iteration of Mercedes, and that really we should be giving more and more credit to the efforts of Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher. They might have been the reason why Mercedes have been so good for so long. Ross Brawn set up the team alongside Mercedes off of the back of Brawn GP's success in 2009, and the biggest reason why the team fell backwards for a couple of years was not because the car was suddenly bad, it was just down to a lack of upgrades and money and investment from 2009. Mercedes had to play catch up to the likes of Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren, who had pumped hundreds of millions of dollars. I can't tell you how much money they would have sunk in to catch up past Brawn and then remain in front of them. And throughout 2010, they were the competitive ones, whereas Mercedes were left floundering and trying to catch up. Come 2012 though, they had gotten there, albeit with a really unreliable car. But then we started to see them fall back off again towards the end of 2012. Which of course meant that Michael Schumacher could make up for the fact that his reliability at the beginning of the season was dog awful. You can watch this video right here why I think Michael might have been given short shrift and he might have had a win or two had things been completely different. But there was a reason for this sudden drop in performance, that they were looking to the 2014 regulations, like Brawn did with the 2009 regulations for Honda, and thinking, we should probably be sinking a lot of resources into that. Look to the power unit, look to the overall car design. Lewis did manage to win in that car, and that means it proved that his move there was not all that terrible. And then the following year, need I say more? Toto did a really good job in maintaining that level of success for several years, and had it not been for the 2021 development war and the fact that Red Bull had caught up so quickly, and they probably had to upgrade and upgrade and upgrade much faster just to remain competitive with that team, that would have compromised the development for 2022. They might have been able to solve the porpoising problem and had a better time of it at the beginning of 2022. But it just goes to show that Toto doesn't know what to do and how to manage this team now that the template that Ross Brawn laid and founded is not there anymore. And it's making me think more and more that maybe Toto Wolff and Gunther Steiner are not all that different. They can maintain it for a decent amount of time. But when it comes to a point where the regulations change or Formula One evolves into something that wasn't there when they first started, that's when things start to fall apart. I feel like Toto needs to find something. He's doing everything he can to try and find that magic silver bullet. But right now, he's not found it. And he keeps changing it, so therefore they can't even try and look deeper and harder to try and find that bullet. It's just not working right now. The difference here, though, between Gunther and Toto is that he does have money and resources to try and find that bullet, and that it might work out for them in the long run, but it's going to take some time. They are right now in the middle of a trough, Mercedes, and maybe 2026 might yield some benefits for them, but that could be the case for any team up and down the grid. This obsession with Max Verstappen really needs to stop, because that's not the problem Mercedes has right now. They need to have the car that can really maximize the potential of the drivers that they have or are going to have. And maybe focus on Antonelli as well, since his very existence has made the second Mercedes seat a seat that nobody really wants. Unless you're Nico Hülkenberg, perhaps. And even though Carlos has been linked to that seat as well as Fernando, I really don't think it's a wise bet to drive for the Silver Arrows at this time. Which is something I explain more of in this video here, and you can probably get an educated guess as to why, but hear me out on this.